On today's episode of the NASM-CPT Podcast with me, Rick Richey, I explore the big muscles of the thighs, the legion of legs, the four-headed phenom, the captain, thick thighs, thunder thighs, Quadzilla. What are the muscles, do you think? Today's episode, we're going to explore the quads, proximal and distal attachments, joint actions, both concentrically, and how we stretch them. All right, make sure you like, follow, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. Now here's the episode on exploring the quads.
You're listening to the NASM-CPT Podcast with Rick Richey, winner of the Share Care Emmy Award for Social Storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey y'all, and welcome to the NASM-CPT Podcast. My name is Rick Richey, and today we are going to be exploring the quads. We're going to look at the quadriceps muscle group, explore them, find out what they are. We're going to go proximal distal attachment. What are the joint actions, planes of motion that it works in? How do we stretch them after we find out? How do we shorten them? So let's talk about the quadriceps, and let's first go with the etymology. So where did it get its name? Quads. So I grew up in Alabama. We used to ride quads. And that's when we got smart and we got rid of the three-wheelers because everybody kept flipping over. So we added another wheel to it, and that made it a fourth wheel. That's right. So then we had a quad. So the quadriceps, quad meaning four, and then we've got quadriceps. And I ask this question a lot. Biceps, what does that mean? Triceps, what does that mean? Quadriceps, what does it mean? And they go, I don't know. I know the biceps has 2 heads, triceps has 3 heads, and the quadriceps has 4 heads. Cool. What does quadricep mean? It means for something. Okay, head. Ceps means head. So it is 4 different heads of a muscle. And I like to say that they're the same muscle, but they're not. They branch off and they have different fascia that cover it and separate them. So they are separate muscles, but they also have fascia that connect them into the same muscle group. So it is a muscle group, the quadriceps. But it's interesting with the quads because a lot of times muscles in groups, when they are like triceps, biceps, quadriceps, they have a common tendon, and that is the case here. So we do have a common tendon here. But before we go any further in this, I want to discuss what are the 4 muscles about in the quadriceps, and then we're going to talk about the rules of muscle, just a review before we get into any deeper into talk of the quads. What are the 4 muscles of the quads? I'm going to give you a sec to think about them. I want you to think them out loud. Think them out loud in your head. Rick, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. You don't think out loud in your head. I do. My voices are so loud in my head. So I want you to think them out loud in your head. What are the 4 muscles? I almost said 3. What are the 4 muscles in the quadriceps? All right, so let's start with them. We're going to start with the vastus muscles. So there's the vastus family. There's vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, and vastus medialis. And part of the vastus medialis is a section of the vastus medialis, but sometimes some people refer to them as a different muscle altogether, though it is not. It just has a different angle of pull. It's the VMO. So that's 3 muscles. And then we've got a 4th muscle, the rectus femoris or rectus femoris. And some people will say, yeah, so we're calling the quadriceps, but the VMO could be looked at as a 5th muscle in the quadriceps. And I was like, well, that doesn't work because then we have to change the name. And so we're just going to say that it is a part of the vastus medialis. And it is. So which part is it? It's that little, what we refer to as the teardrop muscle. Vastus medialis and the vastus medialis obliquus, VMO, is that little teardrop on the medial side of the knee. It drops down, and it's a cute little muscle. I always like to think that there are people that have good legs, have good leg muscles, but sometimes you're born with it. Maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's workout. And usually I can differentiate and say, all right, you have a prominent vastus medialis obliquus. I know that you probably got definition in your legs, musculature in your legs from exercise. And that doesn't just mean working out, but through exercise in general. So whether you're a runner, whether you are a gymnast, whatever it is, but you hit the gym, then yes, that is going to be something that we will look at. So vastus medialis obliquus. And now let's go into some rules of the muscles, because we got rules. We got to follow these rules. What are the rules of muscles? One is the rules of muscle. They can only pull. They cannot push. Muscles don't push anything away. Muscles shorten, which allow you to push something away, but a muscle can only pull. They do not push. Muscles only contract or relax. There is nothing in between. That's why it's called the all or nothing principle. You can the muscle will activate with everything it has, but you'll only engage a few fibers. That's why it's different. If you do body weight squats and you say, well, all or nothing principle, why is it like an explosive jump every time I squat? Because that's not how it works. You only recruit the fibers that you need to produce it, but the fibers that are recruited fire with every bit of their being. Why do we work out? So we can wake some other muscles up and get them to participate. And that's why we will exercise. We'll get those to be a part of it. So we got other things. Muscles have two attachments and they cross at least one joint. And these 2 points are known as the origin or insertion, but I better choose the proximal and distal attachments, and we're going to go into those momentarily. And then muscles only directly move joints they cross. They can indirectly move other joints, but they only directly move joints they cross. Muscles work best in the direction of their fibers, which is why the VMO, vastus medialis obliquus, will have a different pulling pattern. It can also help to extend the knee, but it also will do a medial pull on the patella, which is good because we get some lateral tracking issues that pulls the patella laterally, pulls it sideways. And we have to do things with the VMO to get it to pull the patella back towards the medial side. Well, technically pull it back into alignment by its line of pull. So muscles work best in the direction of their fibers. And here's a soft rule. Insertion moves towards the origin, but that is not always the case. Now, let's get into this. We got a proximal and distal attachment. Let's go with rectus femoris first. The rectus femoris or rectus femoris originates at the AIIS, the anterior inferior iliac spine. Now, you've probably heard of the ASIS, which is anterior superior iliac spine. So if you go to the front of your pelvis and you palpate, you'll feel two little bones jutting out the front of the pelvis. And those are the very end of the bone of the little Mickey Mouse ears in the pelvis, and they have a point. Now, if you look on a pelvis diagram or one of those skeletons that are hanging up, not in the closet, but hanging up inside of maybe a biology room, you'll see the ASIS, and then that's anterior superior iliac spine. And then you follow it down, and there's a bump underneath it. And that is the anterior inferior iliac spine. And that's where the rectus fem attaches to. And also attached a little bit to the acetabulum. So that is the attachment. It will be the proximal attachment. What does proximal mean? Proximal means closer to the center. Distal means away from the center. So it is the proximal attachment. Then we've got the vastus lateralis, and I'm going to save the insertion points, the distal attachments, because they all converge. So I'm just going to go over proximal attachments first. So vastus lateralis originates from the greater trochanter of the femur. It also is the intertrochanteric line. It is the gluteal tuberosity, the lateral aspect of the linea aspera of the femur. And I do want to talk about the linea aspera of the femur. So some of these other things, you can kind of figure out where they are. Greater trochanter is that big bony notch. There's the intertrochanteric line, which has been between the trochanters, and then the gluteal tuberosity, which is a little bit further on the posterior. And then we've got the linea aspera. So what is that? The linea aspera is a ridge on the posterior side of the femur. And what I think is interesting is that all these muscles that are on the front of our leg, or at least this one and another one, its origin point is on the back of the leg. So even if you're doing foam rolling on your hamstrings, you're probably also foam rolling a part of your quadricep. So that vastus lateralis kind of goes from that linea aspera, wraps around the lateral side of the thigh, lateralis. Don't want to give anything away, but lateralis on the lateral side. And then it will, that's its proximal attachment. And so we got another proximal attachment. We've got vastus medialis, originates from where? The linea aspera again. The linea aspera and the intertrochanteric line of the femur, so same places that the other one has its origin from, except it wraps around the other side. So I've got both of these muscles that originate on the posterior side of the femur, and you never see that muscle on the posterior side. They wrap around and they go down into the quadricep tendon. And then there's the vastus intermedialis, because there's the medial and there's the lateral, and then there's the one in between, the intermedius, and it originates from the anterior and lateral surfaces of the femur, and it also goes down into the quadricep tendon. So I've got now 4 muscles and their insertion points, their distal attachments. All 4 of the quadricep muscles go together. They all converge into a common tendon, and that common tendon is called the quadricep tendon. And all that where it attaches above the patella is the quadricep tendon, and then it goes into the patella. And to be maybe a little more technical, it doesn't go into patella, but it's almost like the patella grows inside of the quadriceps tendon, the patellar tendon. And so it grows inside of that tendon. And then at the bottom of the patella is what's called the patellar tendon. So the top of the tendon is the quadricep tendon. That's where they all converge into. And then it kind of, everything goes over the top of the patella, but technically the patella is growing inside of that tendon. And then it attaches into the tibial tuberosity. So it's a big lumpy, bumpy notch on the front of your tibia. So if you follow your thigh down, you go over the patella and you'll hit your shin, and that's your tibia, and that big bony notch on the front of your shin, that is the tibial tuberosity. Tuberosity, fun word for a nice little bony prominence. All right. This episode of the NASM-CPT Podcast is brought to you by NASM One, the membership for trainers and coaches. Members enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of career resources. Get the Edge app to schedule and program clients. Enjoy half off all certifications and specializations, access to free CEUs, and more. All of this for just $35 a month. Go to nasm.org/membership to learn more about NASM One. All right, so now we keep going with the muscles, and we're going to find out what they do. Joint actions and planes of motion. Well, let's do this. We're going to make this real simple. Plane of motion is going to be sagittal plane. And remember, anytime we talk about planes of motion, we talk about what that movement looks like from the anatomical position. So anatomical position is just standing upright, palms facing forward, feet pointing straight ahead. And so in anatomical position, if you were to do something like a squat, which was well known to be a good quadriceps exercise, then as you extend, the muscles in the quadriceps shorten. That's how they work. We'll get into this a little bit more, but that's in the sagittal plane. But when you ask me a question, you might say, well, Rick, I know that, but what if I turn my feet out and I do a real wide squat, or I do a sumo squat or a plie? Well, it's a good question, but technically that's still a sagittal plane movement, because we're going to move you back into anatomical position to identify the joint actions that can take place. So nice try to get me, a little gotcha moment, but you ain't getting nobody. It is going to be considered a sagittal plane movement, but we're going to talk about these muscles. Now, all 4 muscles work together to do one main action, and that is knee extension. They all work together to extend the knee. And remember, the patella is embedded inside the quadriceps tendon, and the reason it has done that is so it provides a mechanical advantage for the knee to extend. If you think about it, we've got the longest muscles in the body. I've got my femur, which is really long, and I've got my tibia, which is really long. And basically, my mechanical advantage is pretty small. If I'm trying to extend my tibia, by grabbing the very tip of the tibia and extending the knee from there. That's not great advantage. Why doesn't it just go a little bit lower on the shin, and then the mechanical advantage would be exponentially greater? It is true, but that would make us exponentially slower too. So we would be stronger with that mechanical advantage, but we would also be slower. And as a species, humans are already super slow. So let's take advantage of at least being at the end of the most proximal end of the tibia. Terrible mechanical advantage for us to do strength, but it also does allow for more of a whipping action once movement gets started. And so it allows us to move a little bit faster. And that patella, I always like to think of it like, I live in New York City. So if you live in a place where you've seen exponential growth recently, and I lived in Miami for a little while in the early aughts, the mid aughts, and I just remember looking out across the skyline, and there were cranes everywhere. Always a crane. There's always a crane everywhere. And I looked in the skyline. There were dozens, and Miami was really going through quite a boom. And on the crane, there's this thing that's up there that allows for the line, the cable, to go over it to give it an advantage, almost it's like a patella. It gives it a little room to extend past the point of just dropping straight down that cable. It gives it something to go up and over. And by going up and over, quadriceps tendon's the same thing. Going into the patellar tendon, goes over the patella, gives a mechanical advantage for knee extension. So it's one of the reasons that the patella even exists. All right, so here's the thing. All these muscles cross over the knee. They all work in the sagittal plane. They all do knee extension. But we got to go back the other way, right? So when it comes to the vastus family, none of those muscles cross any other joint except for the knee joint. So their only obligation, their only job, concentrically, is to do knee extension. But we've got somebody, and this is how I heard to remember this when I first started learning. There's a family, the vastus family, and then someone comes in from the outside and wrecks them. Well, who comes in from the outside? The rectus femoris. The rectus femoris comes in from the outside, wrecks the family. All right, cool. Where does it come from if it comes in from the outside? It comes from the hip. It crosses over the hip joint. And it has a responsibility as much at the knee and as much as the hip as it does at the knee. So it is a hip flexor and it is a knee extensor. It has two joint actions. All the other quadriceps, one joint action does knee extension concentrically. The rectus femoris does knee extension and hip flexion. So let's look this out. And when we think about this and say, okay, well, I want to stretch my quads. And usually when you think about stretching the quads, what do? You probably reach back behind you and you grab your ankle and you try to pull your heel behind you to touch your butt. Cool. Well, if it didn't cross the hip, I wouldn't have to pull my foot behind me in order to get the stretch. I could sit here in a chair, hug my knee to my chest, and just try to pull my heel to my butt, and that would be as much of a stretch as pulling the hip into extension. But it's not as much of a stretch. Why? Because usually it is two joint muscles that tend to get tighter because they're working at two joints. And when you stretch them at both of the joints, that's where you get the greatest amount of stretch. Right? So if I do that and I pull my heel, but hug my knee to my chest, I don't feel the stretch. Most people don't feel the stretch, but some people feel a stretch. What does that mean? That means that their vastus muscles, you're going to feel those muscles getting pretty tight. I see this a lot in jiu-jitsu as well, because a lot of times we'll kneel. We'll kneel down on both knees and sit back on our feet. Well, I can't do that on my right leg because of a knee issue, but the other one I can sit right down. I don't have tight muscles, but some of these big dudes, they can't do it. They're too tight in those vastus muscles. Well, now if I pull my hip into extension, try to get my heel to touch my backside, Now that's a quad stretch, but that is a rectus femoris stretch. And that is why most people will feel that stretch. You want to get into that stretch a little bit more, you can go into even more hip extension by doing a posterior pelvic tilt. So when I have people lying down on my table or they're lying down on the floor and they're stretching their quads, I'll say, push your pubic bone into the floor. And immediately, if I don't tell them to go slowly and they're tight, that hurts. So I always try to tell them, go slowly, but push your pubic bone into the floor and then pull your heel towards your butt. And they get a significantly greater stretch simply by going into a posterior tilt, which means they're going into greater hip extension with their heel pulled back towards their backside. That is the rectus femoris being stretched to capacity. And those are the quadriceps that we just explored. We've got other muscles that we're going to be exploring soon, so stick around and check those out as we continue to produce them. And also, I want to ask a favor. I want you to take, if you found any of this information helpful, like, subscribe, share with your fitness friends and family, and leave a review, preferably 5 stars, but also say something. Go in and leave a comment. Thanks for listening, and thanks to our producer, Eric Sorensen. Y'all want to reach out to me, you can hit me up on Instagram at dr.rickrichy or email me, rick.richey@nasm.org. Y'all keep inspiring people to fitness. Thanks for listening. This has been the NASM-CPT Podcast.